thank you, and thank you for the tacos. Today we will talk about noise, internet noise. So just first, who I am. I'm Paul Jung. Sometimes I'm speaker at BotConf. Now I work for the CIRCL, which is a computer incident response of Luxembourg for the private sector. So maybe you know some of the developments that we made. So mostly we are funded by public funds, so what we do is for the public. And today we will dig into what we do by looking at internet noise, and again, that's kind of things that we give to the public. So we have the chance to own what we call the network telescope. So basically what is a network telescope? It's just a bunch of unused IP address that we monitor. We will see that for many aspects, and we try to extract whatever is possible from these IPs. So this range is routed. This range is quite big. We have nearly 20K of IPs. It's /18 with some additional ranges. It's important to understand that this range was never really used. So from the beginning, it's a range that one of Luxembourgish operator, let's say, shared to us, was never used since the beginning. So more than 10 years without any IP which are registered on internet. It doesn't answer at all. It's just a bunch of range that is not used. We don't have any DNS record or whatever. So with a range which is not allocated, which should be not reached because there are no DNS records, we observe 100 megabytes every 5 minutes of packets. So normally we don't need to have any packet on that, but obviously we receive some packets. So here's the graph. I need to explain a little bit this graph because you will see a lot of such kind of graph today. So that's the network telescope, our network telescope from last year. So on this axis, you have 0 to 365, of course, that's the days from 1st January to the end of the year. And there, it's the ports. This graph is only the TCP port. So from 0 to 65 key, which is the end of the addressable TCP port in IPv4. I didn't mention it, but this range is only on IPv4. So what we could observe, of course, is arm scanning. So you have the vertical one, which means that people are scanning the same port, are sending packets, not maybe scanning, they are sending packets on this port. So for example, such kind of line means that every day we receive packets, tons of packets on these ports during all the year. You can observe also some funny things. This guy spent 1 year to scan 10,000 ports. He got time. That's not Shodan, of course. But well, so that's what we receive. So now we will dig into that, and we try to see what we could observe and what kind of information we could retrieve from that. So just to have an idea, it's 85 billion of packets a year. It's 70 million of IP source, which means that's nearly 2% of the whole IPv4 addressable space that we receive each year. Another problem with our network telescope, we are close to RFC, a private IP range. So it means that besides people scanning, we have also tons of misconfiguration. If you do a mistake when you configure, for example, your syslog server, we may receive it. And we will see that it's complicated because clearly it's pollute what we want to do, but additionally, it gives us tons of funny information. So how do we do that? Because it's a little bit challenging to manage such kind of data. We are not Google, of course, so the data are not, we don't have enough resource for everything. So what we do is first to do the capture. The capture is basic. It's done by TCP dump. We capture everything, and we process it later. So that's, if you want to do that, clearly, keep it simple and stupid, do the capture, and process it later. Because you never know what you will process. You never know that sometimes you will need some additional things to process and so on. So first, we do the capture, we transfer the capture, and then we use Suricata. Eric, where are you? We use Suricata to process that. So Suricata is not designed to create that. Suricata is an idea, but it's quite cool and speedy to extract data, to be able to extract whatever we need. Because we need to have some, let's say, log, like packet filter logs, so source, destination, but also TCP, window size, things like that. Is it a SYN, is it a ACK, and so on? Is it a UDP? We need to have this kind of information, like a firewall logs. But we need also to be able to extract some alert from exploit or things like that. So Suricata was used, not the way it should, I think, but it worked. So for that, once Suricata has parsed the packet, the data going into a ClickHouse. ClickHouse is a database. It's a database, sorry, I'm French still. A database which is quite good at analytics. So it's quite complicated if you want to update things inside that, but that's not the goal here. The goal is to push raw data daily in it and to be able to query and to do heavy query on that. So we use several tables, the packet filter, the port summarization to get fast at having some IP, and also the enrichment. For each IPs, we try to get the GeoIP, the PTR, things like that, so you don't want to do that at each packet, so you do some caching by using this kind of table. Additionally, we don't answer, but there are some protocols which don't need to have unchecks. SNMP, whatever is in UDP, for example, or ECMP, you got the payload. So it's nice to collect DNS query. It's nice to collect SNMP query. And we will see later the other tables that we need. So that's the process that we apply to such kind of data. So the first question is what we have inside that and what we could extract. So first, what we do is to try to split from the data the known scanners. Because, yeah, you know, there are tons of scanners, some legal, let's say that. They ask for payment. Some more obscure, or people are scanning by themselves. So for triaging scanners, there are many solutions. Some scanners are quite clean. There are some scanners which publish IP of the scanners. That's quite nice. Thank you for guys. Some others are quite nice also to publish some PTR. Some are unknown AS. Some are groupable by the query, but it's not so simple. You have some scanner which one host will do the same scanning of ports every day, and sometimes you have some other scanner where each IP will scan a dedicated port. In this case, for grouping, good luck. And also some behavioral help you. So there is an example of Team Seru trying probably to look at forwarding DNS server. That's also quite easy to find that it's there. So by doing that, we are able to detect and to group tons of scanners. More scanners that I never learned about. So you know a lot of them, ONAF, Rapid7, and so on. But we learned that there are some Russian scanners also, F6, Intrasec, which is a French company. They do scan a lot. Not so, we will see. So this is quite useful because you could remove that. If you are a SOC operator, you are quite happy to see and to know that it's a known scanner. Okay? Because the problem, one of the problems is that more than often, customers want that you have the detection in the front, which is completely stupid, but that's another subject. So by using such kind of list, you know that it's a known scanner. You don't care about that. The real problem will come after, with a known scanner or unknown scanner. But so that's our lists that we publish. They are available on GitHub. We maintain, we refresh them monthly, and you may use them to help you to block anything. So another question which is fun is, okay, but all the scanners are scanning the internet. Okay, but how? That's, for example, Yas tier of Shodan. So you have the same, in TCP only, you have the same line always, and you see that tons of scan and not so frequent on some port, which completely makes sense. You have tons of ports that are never used. But that's interesting if you are looking for a CC, whatever, or a specific port to know that, well, that's on our network telescope. Huh? You cannot assume that every internet is scanning the same, but on our large network, it is the case. So Shodan is quite good as, let's say, the regularity. From the beginning of the year to the end of the year, you see it's line. It's quite nice. Some are different. Maybe there are some issues, maybe they are scanning some other network, we don't know. Maybe there are some vacation, maybe, we don't know. And it's interesting to compare them between each the scanners. So, yeah, I know Census is, yeah, Census. So, alors, it's not only comparing, because this is during the full year, okay? And this is on the last 3 months, so from January to March of this year. So I quickly extracted. So the view is a spectrogram of what are the ports the most seen in our network telescope by these vendors. As you can see, UDP is not loved by anybody. And of course, UDP, usually you don't have nothing on that. So that makes sense. For example, Modat, there is a big discrepancy between the TCP port and the UDP port, where Census make everybody happy. And also, it's important to understand the regularity. Regularity is important because when you see that, say, okay, yeah, I will go for Modat because, well, they scan a lot. It's true, but they scan a lot, not every day. If you want regularity, if you want quick update, do your choice. You see some are more, let's say less. Anyway, I'm not a vendor. I don't want to have an issue. And that's the view of TCP only on a sub 1,000 TCP port. So that's the first usage: detect, analyze, try to understand the known things. Let's say that. So what we try to do is to try to find out the unknown things. So in this case, network telescope is also really useful. That's an example. So last year we have, it doesn't work for the Power 80 or 443, of course, because too many applications on the same port, and we cannot see anything. But if you take a look at, for example, this is a really good example, the WSUS exploit. So there is an application, Windows Update, with remote code execution. And the NVD was published the 14th of 10th of last year. And here you have the start. So you see that once there is a publication, everybody is looking for. So it's interesting to raise up what is really matter, what people will really try to find out to do the exploitation. And as an incident response team, national one, which one of the mission is to warn customer to, hey guys, do the update. It's very important for us because it allows us to see what's really, let's say, matter in terms of what kind of exploitation. So that's another application of the network telescope. Additionally, there is some water, cool. As I said before, there are a couple of protocols that are giving a lot of data. For example, SNMP. So in SNMP, in V1 and V2, the community is sending clear. So you can make some nice picture like that, which are totally useless, to have the list of all the community used by the scanner, which is interesting because there you have, let's say, bad people trying to access to some devices. So most of the time, they scan for the basic SNMP information to get information about the name of the device, things like that. But sometimes, it's not the majority, but sometimes you have the usage of a specific MIB. So the information about a specific vendor. In this case, you may see some interesting pattern for you have some cable television devices scanned every year, every day. But when you have a CV on Cisco, oh, you have some people looking for SNMP in Cisco. That's interesting. And you may also, in this case, map on one side the device, on the other side what people are trying to use. So if you take a look, let's say a simple example, Canon, people are scanning from Canon admin, which is, according to the documentation, one of the basic installed and default one. For Cisco, you have the famous Cisco read-only, Cisco Hero. So that's interesting to see what is really weak in terms of IoT devices most of the time. And you may easily extract that from the network telescope. Then we have the DDoS. So I need to explain a little bit. Well, most of you, I think, understand that or know how it works. Sometimes people are generating packets to do the DDoS. So they, for example, generating sync floods attacks. Okay, so they generate a source IP, okay, and then that to the victim. So in this case, you have a bad guy which generates a source IP and sends the packet to the poor victim. The poor victim reply with a SYNAC and reply to the SYNAC to the generated IP. And sometimes, because we are lucky, sometimes the SYNAC is sent to our network telescope because the attacker generated an IP which is in our range. That's what we call the network backscatter traffic. So it's important to understand that it's not magical. You don't have far from that every DDoS. You have only partial volume. That means when the guy is managing to generate some IPs from you, they do that from the whole IP space usually. So you may imagine we are a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the IP space of Internet. But it's interesting because you know that there is a DDoS. You know when it starts. You know when it ends. And unfortunately, you know only the victim. Because in this case, the packet that you receive, the source IP is the victim IP. So you may have this kind of schema. And also, another schema which is quite the same. The bad guy is generating a random IP. In this case, it could be in whatever protocol you want. And then you have a firewall or router which send an ECMP type 3 message, destination unreachable or network unreachable or host or port unreachable, and send back to the network telescope. In this case, it's interesting because when it sends back that, you have often the original payload inside the ECMP packet. So that's a point that, for example, CIRCL doesn't extract. So a simple example, if I take a look at IP range I assigned to Apple, and I take a look at my network telescope, I see that. What are that? So again, that's the destination port used by anybody coming from the Apple range. So you see that there is a lot of garbage here. What is it? That's, of course, the source port. In this case, since it's a packet, a redundant packet, you need to reverse everything. If you reverse everything and you see, if you try to look at the source port as the source IP as a destination IP and do the same for the port, in this case, it's quite clear that people are trying to play with Apple using 80, 993, 443, common DDoS port. And you see that in this case, for example, during 32 days, the poor Apple guys receive 2,000K of packets, which is nothing, but it's abnormal. It's clearly someone testing something. So we daily have 50, more or less, 50 type of alert like that. So mostly on gambling websites, clearly mostly on gambling websites, that's the top one. The quite tricky part is to detect who is the victim, because we don't have the host name. Sometimes you go on IPs like Cloudflare or whatever, or IPs that have tons of passive DNS, so it's quite complicated to identify them. So a clear example, for example, so it's quite fresh, I think it's from last month. It's a law enforcement website. So if you take the story back, 16 days before, we had a little sending of 10 packets. Nobody cares about 10 packets on port 80. Then, 9 days after, you have 2 packets. We know that because we know the DDoS at the end. And you see that the guy is switching from trying to some packets, 1 packet in SSL, 1 packet in HTTP. And then he tries a little bit more, trying to figure out which kind of protocol is the more susceptible to be interesting. 3 days before, a little bit later, and then the final DDoS. So in this case, you see 600 IPs, but it's for each minute 600 different IPs. This graph doesn't show that, but so there is a DDoS for 1.5 hours on this poor website, and that's the kind of things that you may detect by looking at DevNull. Kind of interesting. We have 10 minutes left, so okay, 8. Botnet injection. Every day there are botnet injected. Every day, every day, every day, with some, let's say, CVs that you don't even expect that it's still working. That's the majority of least that things that we mostly see every day. This one, the 2135 key, is one that we see almost every day. Almost every day, people are trying to injecting, most of the time some Mirai or Mirai-like, using this kind of old, very old vulnerabilities. Alors, you may wonder, hey, guy, you don't answer. How do you go to post? That's a good question. Because even if you don't answer, people are sending you payload. That's I don't even know if one day it could work, these kind of things. So for example, this example, you have a guy which sends a SYN, nobody answer. Then he finishes the session which never starts, and push the payload. That's all. So that's clearly not a clean TCP packet. But in this case, we are able to do that. We are able to collect the injection, detect and understand the kind of vulnerability used. Then we download the payload, we classify the payload. If it's a Mirai or things like, we try to fetch the CC, and we try to group them. That's the idea. For example, one injection, this stupid injection in CV, the famous one, is injected since months, since October last year. The same payload is sent since October last year, mostly every day, and injected by 86 different IPs. Every day you have an IP which tries to inject you that. So it's interesting to see this cluster. This cluster of 86 IP, and you may cluster by many things. You may cluster by type of malware, you may cluster by injector, you may cluster by the IP of the backends, name of the, here we have a sheet Vegas well, sometimes it's more rude. Most of the time it's more rude. So it's interesting to look at what they are scanning also. So back to the detector telescope, by only selecting these 86 IPs, you may see that this guy, of course, targeting IoT device, 23, 23, 80, but also looking for email and synology, looking for other CVs, looking for Cobalt Strike team server. We don't know if it could see that. And also, that's a kind of management protocol for routers. That's more interesting. And it starts there, it ends there. So that's tons of information you may extract from that. In UDP, again, you find here our CVEs, but you know now that they are mostly trying to exploit that. So it's interesting. What we look for is new lines. It means, something interesting, a new vulnerability maybe. We try to find out that. Another funny point, which is easy to do. Mirai, this guy is now 10 years old. 10 years old. Huh? The original source code explains that the TCP sequence number is the same as the IP destination, just to to help the router to not maintain the transaction table and to everything going good without eating any money, any memory. Sorry. So we receive scenes packet. So you just have to look at the scenes packet that you receive, and if they are the same that the IP destination, it's probably an old Mirai. So daily, we have 30 to 50 Mirai bots still continuously scanning the internet, because why not? Mostly from some, let's say, West, pardon, countries. And that's also amazing to see that, because for us, that's the original code. Everybody has 10 times. We were quite surprised to see that is still actually used. And to finish, some misconfiguration, because as I recall, the network that we had is really near a private IP network. So you may have tons of problems. Printers that send in syslogs. That's an example. You have people say there is a great firewall of China. It's not so sure. We have some firewall from China running NGTOS, which was a surprise to me to learn. That sent us a IP packet log since months, since November, and they're still doing that. So it's quite complicated to contact them. Please stop it. You have also, and that's complicated, tons of DNS requests from companies. So the question is, so here you have an example. For example, this is just a small example of all people that at one moment have a DNS query to us, and you see that it's clearly Windows trying to find the Active Directory servers. So the question is, okay, that's for us. We are nice guys. I hope so. So what happens if someone replies something? Yeah, because okay, you have the Active Directory, but the whole DNS query are there, so the phishing are quite easy to do. So we're really asking if someone is exploiting that. We don't know, but for us, it's more than 7 key different IP requesting DNS on our telescope, which, well, too much for us. So to conclude, you may think that DevNull is not interesting, but we find many information. We still have tons of data to extract from that, for example, passive DNS, things like that. It's helped us to find out new threats and what are the new threats coming. You may monitor partly DDoS, but still interesting, IoT vulnerability, and that's quite interesting. As again, we are a GIE, so if you want to have access to this data, it's not public, but it's not blocked. So if you want to have access to the list of Mirai or whatever, just send us an email. I don't have a QR code, but the email is quite simple. Just send it, and all the access are available without any cost, of course. And thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We have 2 minutes for questions.
So you're able to see people testing out exploits with your telescope. Have you tried to look for people scanning for unregistered exploits?
We have a couple of exploits that we don't understand how it could work. So the problem is, when you have an exploit, we try to attach it to an existing one. Most of the time, that's old things, to be honest. We didn't see yet any, if you want, exploit that it's related to a new CV that we don't have. We have found out some CV that exist that nobody registered as a CV. It was the case for Ireland router, things like that. So we are looking for that. For now, we didn't have, except this one, we didn't have any real one. The real problem that we had in this case is that we have a big limitation since we only really see UDP packets. So most of the exploits are TCP word, and that's another story.
Okay, a second question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Do you see BGP hijacking activity?
I didn't look at that. So no.
Okay. Last one.
So did you try to, thank you for the presentation, did you try to work with the law enforcement for the Mirai botnet or those disrupt activities?
Alors, to be honest, we work, we share the data to the whole the CIRCL network, so in Europe. For Luxembourg, we directly contact the people in our realm, so provider and things like that, and not directly the police.
And a second question regarding what you observe, do you see a traffic pattern regarding pre-disclosed CVE, like 0 day or something like that?
On some, alors the problem is that, again, I explain, you cannot see all what is HTTP and HTTPS, you cannot see it, it's in the mass. On some strange protocol, for example, for what we have seen a couple of months, yeah, you could see some network activity which rise before the CVE. So you don't know what it is. It could be yes, it could be a tractor. It could be also some people that know there is an incoming vulnerability and try to scan and to notify people. So we don't know. But on some vulnerability, yeah, we see the rise just before the day of the CVE.